Welcome to Continuing the Conversation, where we bring you authentic AI insights. Last episode, we talked about why school never taught us to see our own work as a system and why that's about to matter even more than ever. Rob said something that's been sticking with me in my head ever since we spoke. The rising tide lifts all boats. The low-level watermark became what the LLMs can do. You're unhireable if the LLM can do your task better than you can. That hit me hard. Like, sit with that for a second. And I had one of those moments this week where I caught myself thinking, wait, could AI already do parts of what I do better than I can? Because if that's true for me, and if that's true for individuals, if that baseline just moved, what does that mean for people leading organizations? I'm Chelene Martin, AI strategist, business builder, and someone who spent a career in partnerships, revenue, and building teams. And joining me today is Rob, the CEO of CharmIQ, and a longtime advocate for getting smarter about how we collaborate with AI. Rob, let's get into it. My first question for you really rides on our conversation from last week, the rising tide, what it means for our organization. So let's start with that metaphor, the rising tide, the waterline. You said you're unhireable if the LLM can do your task better. And that's a pretty stark statement. So what does that actually mean inside a company? Like Monday morning, real world, what changes?
This one hits hard for me this week. Last week, we just got Opus 4.7. Opus 4.6 was a big deal. Opus 4.7 is even a bigger deal. So I'll talk about this with respect to what I've just been going through over the past both couple days and couple years. We at CharmIQ, basically, there's very few of us. We have a developer and we have me. And he's specifically younger, just straight out of college. I really wanted to see what this is like, this transition is like through the eyes of somebody who is, just learning and having to deal with all of this AI stuff at the same time. What has been fascinating here is I'm trying to level him up at a rate that's faster than the technology is changing. And as hopefully everyone now knows, the first place where AI is really, really going to take a foothold, and it has been, is within software, anything around software engineering, generating software, etc. So programmers, basically. And what's been fascinating here is, and I'm still struggling with like the best way to talk about this is I've basically had to take, he's about 4 years out of college now, but I always think about it with respect to like as kids are coming out. And normally in somewhere in the 4 to 6 year range, you're trying to start to translate your developers from an individual contributor to a manager or a team lead or that kind of a thing. And it's right in this 4 year thing. They have enough experience to know what they're doing with their normal tasks. And so you start giving them new kids under them to really level them up. And what's crazy here is with Opus 4.7 now, it is as good as a 3rd or 4th year developer. And so my entire day is now rapidly trying to translate my individual contributor into a manager. And I'm kind of harping on this a little bit here because I really want people to understand like what is going to happen? Like, how is this all going to happen in all of these industries where AI comes in? As it starts to chisel away at these entry-level jobs, well, what becomes an entry-level job? And what's fascinating today with something like an Opus 4.7 in software, I would not hire a first year, second year, or even a 3rd year individual anymore. Like, I literally have technology that is better, cheaper, faster, and effectively infinitely scalable than that human. So what does the human need to do at that case? And again, once you move out of those individual contributor skills, you move into a lead or a manager role. And I was just literally right before this, I was talking with him about what does that mean? And normally, again, I'm having these discussions with people over a series of years, trying to get them into this mode of like, well, what does it mean to not be an individual contributor anymore? And what all of us who are managers, like you've gone through that transition, you know that some of the things you run into are like, you keep falling back on your individual contributor skills because that's what you're so comfortable doing. So every task you're trying to like go do the task rather than help the person you're managing do the task for you.
Yeah.
So like, that's the first thing that happens is like, you have to think about like, how do you manage somebody doing the task, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to give that a little taste. So what does this mean for organizations? What this means for organizations is you don't really have individual contributors anymore within, for example, software. You just have teams of agents, which means that all of your hires are now managers or leads, and they have to have those skills. So normally, again, you have this pipeline where the way that you bring people into your organization is you put them in a tactical role and they have hands on keyboards and they do things. And through that, they learn your organization. But again, that's out the window now. Now you have to think about, well, what does it mean that you have this remote developer, which is, again, an LLM that's doing the work? How do you onboard that developer? And more importantly, how do you take your existing staff and move them from those individual contributor roles to manager roles? And what does that mean? And then just to say from an organization standpoint, that usually comes with increase in responsibility, comes with increase in pay and like all of this stuff. So like as an organization, you have to look at that balance sheet now that like you just chiseled off that bottom part. You had to take those people and you level them up. And like, what does all that mean? So I'm just trying to paint a picture of like what this means like tactically today, like as a literal software organization who has to deal with these things, like what am I dealing with? And that's what it looks like.
I think that whether you're in software or tech or sales or marketing or HR, or any of that applies. It's applicable, right? Like, and I think most CEOs know that AI matters, right? They've seen the headlines, they've gone to conferences. You can't go to a conference anywhere and not see AI, right? Or hear about it. And maybe their teams are even testing or using tools that are AI. But the difference between knowing AI is important and actually preparing your organization for it is different. So what's the blind spot? Because I think they're underestimating it, or they might just be misunderstanding it.
Great question. So you're going to fall back into the pattern that you've always had, right? Like if you're a business owner, you've been doing this forever. Like, so for example, when I was working in a larger org and you had a pipeline, you start with interns and you know which schools to go to and you know which interns to hire. And then you know how to cull through that list and you know how to make them your new hires and how to incentivize that. And you know how to move them through and everything else. Well, we just kind of chopped off 3 or 4 rungs of that whole process. And now, like normally, again, the people that you're moving up already have and have been indoctrinated in your company and they know your processes and like all this other stuff. So now because of this rising tide, like the people that you're potentially hiring are at a much higher, well, you need them at a much higher level, but they may not have those skills yet.
Right.
And normally they would get those skills by doing some of the hands-on things. So again, like that's a really big blind spot. I do not think CEOs and, again, people who are HR who are running these things are recognizing what it means to their regular cadence when all of a sudden you start chopping off these lower rungs. And again, then you're just thinking to yourself, well, I just hire people up into there. But again, you may not have the processes in place to bring people in that haven't gone through these rungs and walked these ladders up these things. So like, that's it. And then another thing is you have to, I'll just talk about a friend of mine. He just recently started a nonprofit organization. It's called Just AI. And they're looking at trying to help organizations specifically in this way of taking jobs and roles and breaking them into skills and starting to assess which of those skills are exposed to AI and which ones aren't. And in what ways are they associated with it? And then do you have to pivot roles? Because if, for example, you look at developers and you remove all of these individual contributor tasks, well, what does everyone become when that happens? And it's kind of easy in software because we already have like what those roles look like. Again, you move up into a lead or a manager and so forth. But in some other roles, like if you're in legal or something and your paralegals you don't need them anymore, something like as AI starts to, again, raise this, again, what does that mean? Does the roles that still exist, are they full roles or do they end up being partial roles? You have to now fold into a new role that somebody goes into. So like, all of this stuff, all of these things that we've been doing and these things that have been defined for decades now, it's starting to crumble. Because again, are these full person roles that still exist? And again, as you start to look at these things, I mentioned this a number of episodes back, there were days where I would say to people, like, don't go into this space because you would have to spend so much time and so much energy building up all of this basic stuff in order to start going. And if all of that, all of a sudden, the reason that you had a competitive advantage was because you had built up all of this large set of integrations or something like that, if all of that can be done by a suite of these agents that are just running ahead, like you have to really look at that again. Or again, like, is your customer support like the thing that got you there? And again, is like certain parts of that being chiseled away. So, and to even go one step further, like as you remove these lower level skills, like it's always the case that you see this where the CEOs go and they fire a whole bunch of people and they realize, holy crap, those are the only people that actually knew what the heck was going on. So not only do you have to identify these skills and then see if the resulting roles are big enough, so to speak, to fill people, like, can you put people in those, or like, do people get the responsibilities? But with the roles that you removed, were they the ones that actually knew what the heck was going on and where the bodies were buried? So all of this is happening at the same time that this technology is moving infinitely fast. So half of your teams are trying to figure out what the hell is going on. So like literally as we're recording this, Google Next is going on. So the first thing I have to do after this is I have to go now listen to 2-hour keynotes and like figure out what changed and what new technologies exist. And like, it's going to change in 6 more weeks. So like, again, all of this is going on in that thing. So like, it's crazy. But at the end of the day, it comes down to roles, processes, and understanding where it fits within your org.
So you've talked about process debt and the way developers talk about technical debt. So what does that mean and why does that matter now? Because I think a lot of people listening are like, wait, we're running on process debt and I don't even know it. Like they don't know like how that translates into this. And I think it goes to like what you were just saying.
Yeah. So let me bring up, I always bring up my buddy because I always talk to him. He's in marketing. We always talk before this call. So he's always like top of mind. So he is new to the banking credit card industry. And what's been great about that is if they would have brought in somebody in marketing that exactly knew, they wouldn't be going through this process now where they're trying to explain to him all of this stuff that he doesn't know. So they're learning about all of these intrinsic processes that they have, like onboarding wise, and like all of this stuff that they just do. Because when you're in an industry for, a number of years, you know that you have to put something through compliance first and it has to go through this stuff. But when you bring the new guy in that's never done this before, you have to kind of explain to them how compliance and, these kind of processes work. So what's interesting now is normally you would go to marketing, would write copy, and that copy would then go through compliance, and then that would go back and, usual stuff back and forth. But what's fascinating is that he is starting to set up his compliance agents that as he's learning things about this industry that they're in, he's creating agents that basically help him with the pre-step of compliance. So again, you would normally have this process that says like, you must go do this, you must go do that, and then you must iterate here. But now, again, you're going to pre-step all of these processes and you're going to say, hey, no, that's going to fall back on the individual contributors to go through and do the pre-step as we've talked now a bunch of times. Like instead of doing your red lines with compliance sitting in front of you, you're going to have your dudes helping you go through it. Yes. And of course, at the end, it has to go through compliance, but it completely changes the workflow and the timing and the workloads that are on, whether it's internal counsel, external stuff, and so forth. So all of these processes are starting to change because now we're going through and we're finding out where can you slot in some of these other things. Again, can you slot in a pre-step where, again, going in marketing, normally there's a whole step where you go to your customers and you interview with them and things like that. But if you can instantiate your customer personas initially and get some initial feedback using AI, then you can remove parts of that initial step and it moves later in the process. And maybe compliance ends up coming in there first before you talk to people. So again, you have to look at what you're doing today, look at where these things can be, again, simplified or in some cases completely obviated with the technologies that exist and so forth. So, and this comes back to what we have been talking for now the past couple of weeks is if you can't even articulate what your processes are, then like, how can you even possibly know where to insert some of these things in there? And again, what's been interesting about my buddy going into a new org and a completely new thing is that the whole teams are now forced to like think through their processes and so forth. So like, are there forcing functions? Hire somebody in and like write it all down. Like, what can you do?
Yeah. And I want to push on this for a second because I've seen the other side of this at Yahoo. I worked for some leaders who turned documentation into micromanagement. And
Yes.
who tracked everything, right? Calls, meetings, emails, bi-weekly wrap-up sheets. I mean, it would take 2 hours for my team just to report what they did in a week or two, right? And they would come to me and be like pulling their hair out and be like, well, I couldn't get to that because I was filling out these damn forms about the process that I go through to get these deals done. And
Yep.
it drove me insane. It drove them insane, and it slowed everybody down. So I want to be clear. This isn't about watching your people more closely. It's not about tracking activity, because if your process requires 2 hours of reporting, then it's broken. Right. And this is more so like, how do you do this in a way that creates clarity without creating bureaucracy? Right? And in the end state, it's going to, I think what you were saying, it's going to make everyone more efficient, better, stronger, faster, let your new people get up to speed. And probably in the whole process, you're going to be able to eliminate certain things because it can be automatically done by AI during the process. So you're kind of shaving out, giving people time back, giving people potentially days back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
And you just brought up an interesting one, which I forget about that world. I've been out of it for a while, but the weekly reporting stuff, as I showed now, I think a couple of weeks ago, where we were going through GitHub and we used an agent to basically rip through mine and my developers' workflow and effectively imagine taking that worksheet that you would normally fill out, just give it to the dudes and say, hey, dudes, like, you see the work that I'm doing, you record the meetings that you're in, et cetera. Like, you go do that. Maybe, because I understand why some of that reporting is essential, right? Like, the visibility is really important, but it's really onerous on the other side. And again, maybe this is a perfect place where technology slots in and you get not only the visibility that you always dreamed of, but you got rid of the onus of like just this massive weight that you put on everybody every single week to report on this stuff. So again, super fascinating times.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, AI isn't the disruption, it's exposure, right?
Yeah.
It's exposing where companies already are fragile and they just don't know it yet. And I think, the stuff that I've done, kind of helping CEOs and leaders of team expose that workflow, it's eye-opening. They're like, I had no idea people were spending hours, doing this. And now we can actually eliminate that process, automate it through AI. So it's exposing the areas where companies can be better, stronger, faster versions of themselves, and where AI fits in that process. So if the waterline moved and most companies haven't even mapped where their people are, that sounds like a crisis. But also it feels like an opportunity at the same time. So, if you're a CEO or a leader of teams, what would you recommend?
Yeah, so I'll just go back to talking about what my buddy's doing at his new gig, which is because everyone is now slotted into helping him onboard, everyone's cognizant of that. And because he's onboarding using AI, everyone's being introduced to this way of like, oh my goodness, I never thought that we could codify some of this process, have the agents work on some of it. And now our process becomes more of a reviewer and a direction steerer rather than the ones who are actually like doing the work. And that's really been changing significantly from top to bottom. What's been great is he has had access directly to the CEO and talking about these things. And they're talking about applying it in different areas across the organization. And I think that's what always happens is you bring in one champion or one individual who like really has an interesting mindset change on this. You go all the way up and then all of a sudden then it starts sweeping left and right across the organization in terms of like, how else, where other places can we do this? And again, this is where some of this process that comes into place and so forth. So this is a big opportunity because, again, everything's changing. So why not use this opportunity to really look across your organization and look for some of these places where maybe there was value that, again, individuals could never really get to because they were doing all these other things before. As I mentioned before, you end up with sometimes these half roles where it used to be a whole human that was in that role, but some of their job gets automated away. And but maybe by bringing some of those halves together, you actually get these synergies and these efficiencies that you really never understood before. By separating the two pieces, you didn't know that, like, if the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing, sometimes it would be better if they were working together. And again, if that ends up being one body, then it actually works together more efficiently and effectively.
Yeah. And I think, the questions I think a lot of CEOs or leaders of team, again, like, you don't have to be a CEO to like do this do this, work or dig into it, right? And I think a lot of CEOs don't want to ask, what if your competitive advantage, and I think you sort of mentioned this, isn't really expertise, it's just that your team is really good at doing the routine tasks, right? That could be automated. Like I think you brought up like customer service, right? And if that's true, then what's your responsibility as a leader today? Knowing what you know about AI, knowing about the systems and the technology that's out there, what's your responsibility as a leader?
Yeah, a great question. What's so hard is because things are changing so fast and you have your whole domain, right? So like you were imposed upon by this thing called AI and you had all this other stuff you were planned. And, I always remember the quarterly business reviews that you do, and you would be looking and trying to look 3 months ahead and do the stuff. And it's like, you can't, especially in technology, you can't be doing quarterly reviews anymore. So the most important things CEOs can be doing right now is looking for the people in your org that are like duck to water. Like if you find the people that are taking to this stuff and accelerating because of it, learn something from that. Like where is it happening? Like look at those processes. Where are they getting efficiencies? Are they actual efficiencies? Does it look like you're getting efficiency? Because sometimes what's amazing about these LLMs is they can just produce gobs and gobs of goo, but is it useful goo? Or is it like extra goo that you don't have work on? And just like software, anytime you produce it, now you have to maintain it. So again, is it a good idea to do that? And so I'll just say from a tactical standpoint, some of the things that we're doing is instead of developing new code, we're actually developing tools to help us develop the new code. So it's like fundamentally changing the way that we're thinking about the work that we're doing. Because like, again, especially with Opus 4.7 that just came out, we are now putting the dude to work to generate things that we would produce. And that's not a thing I would normally think about. Apply that to your area. Again, what's the CEO's job? The CEO's job is to like look at those things and to acknowledge the change and to propagate that change across the organization and make Chelene, this first and foremost, working in a lot of change management, you just have to prepare people mentally for the fact that things are going to break. Like we have to be prepared to change, and like change is hard. And that may mean like people are in different roles, and we have to start upskilling people, and we have to start understanding the needs of those people that are being upskilled and what does that mean and so forth. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. And I think, even on the business side, I'm coaching someone she's been in her role for a couple years now, but her challenge with her boss, who she loved and respect, was like that he kind of micromanaged her work. And she set up a boss agent to mirror him, to mirror his feedback, and over time she developed this amazing agent that mirrors her boss. So now before going to him with a draft or anything, she runs it through that boss agent, gets the feedback on the project from his perspective, is able to tweak things, even simple words that they were able to pull out in past emails and feedback sessions. And he's like, in her review, her annual review that happens mid-year, he said, you have exceeded my expectations. You come to me less for feedback. And when you do, I have like little to no feedback, but that's because she's getting it prior to going to him. You can do that from a boss perspective, a customer perspective, right? Yes. Is this promotion going to resonate with our customers, new customers or existing? You can get that feedback in real time, create anchors in that promotion that answer those questions, right? So I think it's like kind of finding those areas of your business. I know it can feel and sound overwhelming in terms of AI, but you don't need to pick the whole organization to start. You can pick one team, one process. And I know, because I've been through that with companies, the outcome of that is so inspiring and so that you're excited to roll it out to the rest of the organization. And then the good news is you already have a case study, because that change management of who moved my cheese, guess what, guys? It's not going to be that painful, because the end result is going to be more time back in your job and in your life to be more productive, to be a better, stronger, faster version of yourself. So Rob, this completely reframes how the AI conversation for leadership should be going. The risk isn't that AI is coming. It's already here, and boy, is it here. We've been talking about it for over a year. The risk is that you're not building the infrastructure to help your people rise with the tide. Because this isn't about, and this is so important to me, this isn't about replacing people. It's about revealing where they're stuck and where you can help them improve their process and their lives in your workplace to help them become better, stronger, faster versions of themselves. So here's the takeaway. Don't wait for the AI strategy. You don't need it. You can get started today. You can pick a workflow, you can map it, understand it, and improve it. Because the companies that win in this next phase aren't the ones with the best tools, right? It's not the ones that went out and spent $1 million on AI and now they have it and they're going, where do we start? They're the ones who understand how the business actually runs. And the tide is rising either way. So the question is, are you building a scaffolding for your teams, or are you watching the advantage kind of slip under the water? And if you're starting to see your work differently and your team differently and your business differently, then you're exactly where you're supposed to be. So that's really good news. So make sure you follow or subscribe. We have so many great episodes that kind of build to these moments. And I know that I'm sort of excited in the next week or two to hear about the Google Next. I always look forward to, Rob, your insights on these big moves in the industry. And you do such a good job kind of taking all of the information and funneling it through to us so we know what to focus on and what's coming and what's here and how to take advantage of it. So thanks for continuing the conversation with us. And we look forward to more conversations like this. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.